You've probably heard of the Gold Coast of Long Island, the place where American fortunes tried to outgrow Europe, where limestone palaces rose from potato fields and hedge-lined driveways stretched so long you could forget where the road began. The world of Gatsby parties, champagne fountains, jazz drifting across manicured lawns, and chandeliers bright enough to make the night feel like noon. But what you almost never hear about is the other world, the one that existed beneath all that beauty, the invisible world, the world that woke before dawn and went to sleep long after the last guest staggered home, the world that made the glamour possible while remaining deliberately unseen. So if you're settling in for the night, maybe pull the blanket just a little closer, let your breathing slow, and imagine this story unfolding not in the bright ballrooms everyone remembers, but in the quiet corridors behind the walls, the narrow staircases hidden from guests, the servant bedrooms tucked under the roof, where the laughter from below arrived only as a distant echo. And if these stories help you drift off, consider subscribing. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Because tonight we're going back to a place that looked like a dream from the outside and felt like something very different once you stepped inside. Now let's travel back to the summer of 1922. Right now you're warm, safe, your pillow shaped perfectly to your head, your body supported by a bed that doesn't creak or collapse beneath you. But close your eyes and imagine something else. Imagine standing on a dirt road under a punishing afternoon sun, dust clinging to your boots, your dress damp with sweat, your stomach hollow from hunger, your entire life packed into a single carpet bag that's already beginning to fray at the seams. The year is 1922, and you are standing in Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island, a place you had never heard of 3 months ago, a place that might as well be another planet compared to the grey fields of County Cork, where just weeks earlier you stood on a dock watching your mother cry as the ship pulled away, her face shrinking into the crowd until she was nothing more than a blur of dark clothing and waving hands. Your name is Mary Catherine Brennan, you're 21 years old, and you crossed the Atlantic in steerage, trading 6 weeks of hard labor for passage, scrubbing decks slick with vomit, sleeping in a bunk barely wide enough to turn over in, pressed between other girls who cried quietly into their pillows at night, so no one would hear, enduring storms that felt personal, like the ocean itself resented your attempt to escape. But you made it, and now you're here, walking for nearly 2 hours under a sky that feels too big and too bright, following vague directions given by a man at the train station who barely looked at your face before pointing west and telling you that you couldn't miss it, that it was the castle on the hill, a phrase that made you almost laugh, because you knew castles, real castles, the broken kind, the kind with ivy-choked walls and crows nesting in empty towers, not whatever American fantasy he was imagining. And then the trees part, your feet stop moving, and your breath catches somewhere deep in your chest, because rising out of the landscape ahead of you is not a house, not even a mansion, but something closer to a transplanted European dream, a palace built of pale limestone that gleams in the sun, its towers reaching upward, its hundreds of windows flashing light back at the world like scattered diamonds, its roofline a chaotic procession of chimneys and peaks that seems to go on forever. You've never seen anything like it, never imagined anything like it. And in that moment, the church back home, the grandest building you had ever entered, shrinks in your memory until it feels almost small, because this place could swallow your entire village and still have room left over for Sunday dinner. The grounds alone feel unreal, formal gardens arranged in perfect geometry, fountains catching the light, statues standing watch over lawns so green they look painted, and beyond it all, a lake glimmering quietly, with something that looks suspiciously like a private golf course stretching toward the horizon, built for one family, a concept so absurd you almost feel dizzy trying to understand it. By the time you reach the iron gates, your legs are trembling, and when a uniformed guard steps out of the gatehouse, his eyes slide over you in a way you've already learned to recognize, taking in your accent, your bag, your dust-coated boots, and filing you neatly into a category you didn't choose. Deliveries around back, he says automatically. And when you tell him you're not delivering anything, that you're here for the housemaid position, that you have a letter from your cousin Bridget who works in the kitchen, his expression softens just enough to let you through, directing you not to the front door, of course, but around the east side of the house, to the servants' entrance, the door meant for people like you. It takes another 10 minutes just to walk the driveway, crushed white gravel crunching beneath your feet, the house growing larger and more overwhelming with every step, until the grandeur begins to fade slightly, and you find yourself in the working heart of the estate, where windows are smaller, walls are plainer, and the smell of bread drifts out of an open kitchen window and makes your stomach clench painfully. And then you hear your name, Mary. You turn, and there is Bridget, your cousin, her face fuller than you remember, her eyes brighter, her apron dusted with flour, looking like someone who eats 3 meals a day and sleeps in a real bed. And when she hugs you, you realize you're crying too, not from sadness this time, but from the sheer shock of having made it this far. She laughs when you tell her how big the house is, tells you that you haven't seen anything yet, that there's a ballroom, a library, bathrooms with hot running water, words that feel almost unreal to you, because back home hot water meant hauling buckets from the fire, one by one, and bathing once a week in a tin tub. She takes your carpet bag, takes your elbow, and leads you inside, through corridors that are already teaching you a lesson you'll spend years learning, that this house has 2 worlds, one meant to be admired, and one meant to stay hidden. Down here the walls are plain, the floors cold stone, the lighting soft and dim, gas lamps casting yellow pools of light as you pass, the air filled with steam and soap and cooking food, and as you walk, Bridget explains that the family isn't even in residence yet, that they only come for the summer, but that a house party is coming, which means everyone is already running themselves ragged to prepare. You ask how many servants there are, and when she tells you that there are over 100 when the family is present, all working for just 4 people, the math refuses to make sense in your mind, because you grew up in a world where one tired woman did everything, and here it takes an army to keep a single household alive. She stops in front of a heavy wooden door and knocks, and when a clipped voice tells you to enter, you step into the small sitting room of the housekeeper, the woman who will decide the shape of your days, the woman who controls everything below stairs. Mrs. Whitmore sits behind her desk like a judge, silver-haired, severe, her eyes missing nothing as they take you in, and when she tells you you're late, when she opens her ledger and begins asking questions about your abilities, your education, your discipline, you realize that this is the real threshold, not the iron gates outside, but this moment where your future will be decided in ink on a page. You answer carefully, promise to work hard, and when she finally tells you that you'll start at the bottom, as a third housemaid, rising at 5:30, working until the family retires, earning $20 a month, with room and board included, you say yes because saying no isn't an option, because $20 a month is more than your father ever earned, breaking his back in the fields. And as Bridget leads you away, up narrow stairs that seem to go on forever, toward a small shared room beneath the roof, you don't yet know what this life will demand of you, how invisible you will become, how much of yourself you'll give away piece by piece. But for now, as you see the narrow bed waiting by the window, clean sheets pulled tight, a pillow that isn't stuffed with straw, you sit down and let yourself breathe. Tomorrow, your real life begins. The servants' quarters sit at the very top of the house, and in a place this large, the top feels less like an attic and more like a distant country of its own, reached only by narrow staircases that twist upward in tight turns, each step worn smooth in the center, by decades of hurried feet, moving quietly, always quietly, because noise travels upward and downward in these houses, in ways servants learn to fear. Your room is small and shared, 3 narrow beds pushed against whitewashed walls, a single window looking out over the back gardens where the fountains murmur softly through the evening air, a washstand with a cracked basin, and a mirror so old it blurs your reflection, just enough to make you look like someone else, someone halfway between who you were and who you are becoming. To you, after weeks in steerage and years of sharing a bed with sisters back home, this room feels like luxury, because it offers something you have not had in a long time. A moment of stillness, a place where you can sit and breathe and feel the weight of your body sink into a mattress that does not fight back. But that stillness does not last. The bell rings before dawn, sharp and unavoidable, echoing through the servants' corridors like a command rather than a sound. And when you open your eyes, the room is already moving around you, shadows shifting as Annie and Ruth dress by candlelight, their movements practiced and quick, their hands fastening buttons and tying aprons without hesitation. There is no gentle waking here, no lingering under blankets, because the house must be awake before the family even stirs, and the work that allows their comfort begins long before they open their eyes. You wash your face in water so cold it steals your breath, pin your hair beneath a stiff white cap, and pull on the uniform that feels unfamiliar and heavy against your skin. Black cotton starched until it crackles when you move, a white apron tied tightly at the back, every detail designed, not for comfort but for order. Inspection happens in the servants' hall, a long, narrow room in the basement, where gas lamps throw yellow light across rows of faces standing at attention. Women on one side, men on the other, everyone silent as Mrs. Whitmore moves slowly down the line, checking collars, hands, hair, posture, stopping now and then to send someone back upstairs for a crooked button or dirty fingernails. When she reaches you, her eyes pause just long enough to make your heart pound. Then move on. Adequate, she says, and you learn very quickly that in this house, adequate is praise. Your first assignment is the family bedrooms, and you are sent to work under Sarah, a second housemaid, who has been in service long enough that the house seems to have shaped itself around her movements, her body remembering every turn and corridor without conscious thought. She shows you the servant stairs, the hidden arteries of the estate, narrow, steep, dimly lit passages that run behind walls and between rooms, designed so that servants can move through the house without ever crossing the grand halls or drawing the attention of guests. The family does not like to see us, Sarah tells you plainly, as if stating a natural law, and you understand immediately that invisibility is not an accident here. It is the entire point. Your day begins with coal. Fireplaces must be lit before the family wakes, because no one of importance should ever feel cold. And that means hauling heavy scuttles up 4 flights of stairs, the metal handles biting into your palms as your arms shake under the weight, your breath coming faster with each step. You learn how to clean a grate properly, how to lay paper and kindling so the fire catches gently instead of choking itself, how to judge coal by feel rather than sight in the dim light of early morning, and how to move quickly but quietly, because speed is required, but noise is punished. Then come the chamber pots, porcelain and painted with delicate flowers, emptied and rinsed in the slop closet, a task performed without comment, because dignity has no place in this work, only efficiency. Water must be carried next, hot and cold, brass cans hauled up the same narrow stairs, because the pipes do not reach everywhere they should, and by the time you have filled pitchers and wash basins in 6 bedrooms, your uniform is damp beneath your arms and your hands tremble slightly when you set the cans down. Beds follow, enormous constructions of stacked mattresses, fine linens and blankets softer than anything you have ever touched. And you learn quickly that making a bed like this is not a domestic task but a physical one, involving lifting, turning, stretching, and tucking sheets so tightly that Sarah says a coin should bounce if dropped. You are slow at first, painfully slow, and each time you fumble, Sarah repeats the same phrase, calm but relentless. You still get faster. Dusting comes next, every surface polished until it reflects light, every object treated as if it could shatter the household's entire future if mishandled. And when Sarah warns you not to touch a blue and white vase because it is Ming Dynasty and worth more than you will earn in your lifetime, You feel a strange mix of fear and disbelief, because you are standing inches away from an object more valuable than your entire past. Throughout it all, you learn to listen. Footsteps in the main corridor mean you retreat instantly into hidden passages, pressing yourself against walls as daughters of the house pass by, unaware that warm rooms and fresh water did not appear by magic, but by exhausted hands working in darkness. Breakfast for the servants comes late. Porridge and toast and tea, eaten quickly in strict order of rank, upper servants nearest the warmth, lower servants closer to drafts, and you learn that even below stairs there are ladders, and everyone knows exactly where they stand on them. When you finally see the main floor, hours into your shift, it feels unreal, like stepping into another country without a passport. Marble staircases sweeping upward beneath crystal chandeliers, walls lined with paintings that watch you silently as you pass, furniture too beautiful to touch, rooms designed not for living, but for being seen. The contrast is dizzying. Upstairs, in narrow corridors and hidden rooms, bodies bend and sweat and ache to keep everything running, and downstairs beauty sits still, waiting to be admired, never acknowledging the labor that holds it in place. By evening, when you are finally released from duty, your body feels hollowed out by exhaustion, and as you climb back to the servants' quarters, the gardens glow in the fading light below your window, fountains whispering, birds settling into trees, and for a moment you let yourself wonder what it must feel like to move through this world without being invisible. You lie down fully dressed, your muscles buzzing, your hands sore but steady, and as the house quiets around you, you realize that this is only the first day, that tomorrow and the day after will bring the same bells, the same stairs, the same endless cycle of unseen work. And somewhere deep inside, a small understanding settles in, quiet and heavy. This house does not run on money alone. It runs on people like you. After the first few days, the house stops feeling like a single place and begins to feel like a system. A living mechanism made up of corridors, bells, schedules, and people who move through it with the precision of clockwork, each action triggering another somewhere else, unseen but essential. You begin to understand that nothing here is accidental, not the timing of breakfast trays, not the warmth of a bedroom fireplace, at exactly the moment a daughter opens her eyes, not the way fresh flowers appear on a side table without anyone ever being seen carrying them. Because this house is designed to give the illusion that comfort simply exists, that wealth naturally produces ease, and that effort belongs only to those unfortunate enough to exist outside its walls. Below stairs, hierarchy rules everything. At the top sits the butler and the housekeeper, figures of absolute authority whose word carries the weight of law, followed by the upper servants, ladies' maids, valets, the cook, people who work closely with the family and speak to them directly, sometimes even joke with them, while lower servants like you move through the house like shadows, spoken to only when something has gone wrong. You learn quickly who eats where, who speaks when, who may sit and who must stand, because a mistake here is not merely embarrassing, it is dangerous, and a single misstep can end your position without warning or reference. The bells become your language. Each room is connected to a call box, and every ring has its own rhythm and meaning. One short ring for water, 2 for assistance dressing, 3 for an urgent request, and you learn to read them instinctively, your body moving before your mind has fully registered the sound. When a bell rings upstairs, someone below must already be in motion, because delay is noticed and delay suggests failure, and failure is not tolerated in a house that exists solely to perform perfection. House parties change everything. When guests arrive, the rhythm accelerates, stretching the day until it barely ends at all, servants rising before dawn and collapsing long after midnight, fueled by leftover bread, tea gone cold, and the knowledge that exhaustion is temporary but dismissal is permanent. You do not see the parties directly, not really. You hear them first, laughter drifting through ceilings, the swell of music echoing down corridors, the clink of glasses carried on air warmed by candlelight, and sometimes when you pass through a service door at just the wrong moment, You glimpse silk skirts swirling across polished floors, diamonds flashing beneath chandeliers, men laughing too loudly, women leaning close to whisper things meant to stay secret. Then the door closes, and the illusion resumes. Your world during these nights exists in the margins, turning down beds while champagne flows below, refreshing water pitchers while orchestras play, relighting lamps, so that when guests retreat upstairs they never have to think about darkness. You learn that invisibility is not passive, it is work. It means knowing when to move and when to freeze, when to breathe and when to disappear into a wall, because nothing unsettles a guest faster than realizing someone has been watching them the whole time. By the end of the first house party you work, your body feels like it no longer belongs to you, your hands moving on instinct while your mind floats somewhere just behind your eyes, detached and strangely calm, because this is how the machine survives, by turning people into functions. And yet, even in this world designed to erase individuality, moments slip through. A cook who slips you an extra slice of bread when no one is watching, a gardener who nods at you in passing, a silent acknowledgement between people who know what it is to work until their backs ache, a fellow maid whispering a joke in the laundry room that makes you laugh too loudly before you both catch yourselves and fall silent again. You begin to understand that below stairs is its own society, with its own rules, friendships, grudges, romances, and quiet rebellions. Because no system, no matter how tightly controlled, can fully erase the human need to be seen by someone, even if it is only by another shadow. At night, when you finally lie down in your narrow bed, the house does not go quiet. It breathes. Pipes click as water cools, floorboards settle, distant footsteps echo through corridors you cannot see, and somewhere below, someone is still awake, polishing silver, scrubbing a stain, checking locks. Because the machine never truly stops, it only slows, resting just enough to begin again before dawn. You fall asleep, knowing that tomorrow will be the same, and the next day, and the next. That time here is measured not in weeks or months but in seasons, in the arrival and departure of families who treat these palaces like summer costumes, worn briefly and then stored away. And without realizing exactly when it happens, you begin to change. Your hands harden, your movements sharpen, your sense of time stretches and compresses until whole days disappear into labor and entire weeks blur into memory. The girl who arrived from County Cork with dust on her boots still exists somewhere inside you, but she is quieter now, watching as you learn the most important lesson this house has to teach. That luxury is fragile, that beauty requires constant repair, and that behind every perfect surface lies an army of people whose names will never appear in photographs. The first great party you work does not announce itself with excitement, but with tension, a subtle tightening of the house that you feel before you understand it, like the air before a storm, when everyone moves faster, speaks less, and listens more carefully for the sound of bells. By mid-afternoon, the kitchens are already in controlled chaos. Pots clanging, knives flashing, steam clouding the air as dishes more elaborate than anything you can pronounce are prepared with military precision, while upstairs the housemaids move through bedrooms, turning down beds that will not be slept in for hours, setting water pitchers that may never be touched, lighting fires in rooms that already feel warm, because comfort here is not about need, it is about expectation. The guests begin to arrive just as the sun dips low enough to turn the lawns gold. You do not see them directly at first, but you hear them, the crunch of gravel under motorcar tires, the murmur of voices growing louder, the sudden bloom of perfume and tobacco smoke that drifts through corridors like an invading weather system. Then the music starts. It rises from the ballroom in waves, strings and brass and piano blending into something lively and urgent, a sound that vibrates through the floors and into your bones as you move silently along service passages, carrying trays, replacing candles, straightening gloves left behind in haste. At one point you pass a partially open door and catch a glimpse of the ballroom itself, a flash of movement and color that feels almost unreal, women in silk dresses spinning beneath chandeliers, men laughing with glasses raised, jewels catching the light and scattering it like sparks, And for a brief moment, the scene looks exactly like the magazines say it should, exactly like the dream America promised the world. Then the door closes, and you are back in shadow. Your work during the party is endless and oddly repetitive, an invisible orbit around the celebration, emptying ashtrays before they overflow, collecting glasses before guests notice they are gone, refreshing rooms so seamlessly that the family never realizes anyone has passed through at all. You learn quickly that parties are not about joy for the people who serve them. They are endurance tests. Hours pass without clear markers, time measured instead by the number of candles replaced, the weight of trays lifted, the growing ache in your lower back as you bend and straighten again and again, your body moving even when your mind feels distant, floating just above the noise. And yet, there are moments. A burst of laughter that carries down the stairwell, a song that slows the dancers and softens the room, a quiet exchange between guests who lean too close, thinking no one can hear them. You learn secrets without meaning to. Fragments of conversations about money, marriages, rivalries, business deals made and broken between sips of champagne, and you realize that this glittering world is held together by just as much fear and insecurity as the one you left behind in Ireland. Only here it is wrapped in silk instead of wool. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion settles into your muscles like wet sand, heavy and unavoidable. But the work does not stop, because the guests do not stop. And when the music finally fades and the laughter thins into scattered voices, the real labor begins. Cleanup. The ballroom that hours earlier glowed like a jewel box is suddenly a battlefield of empty glasses, wilted flowers, wax dripped onto polished floors, chairs pushed out of place, and it is now your job to erase all evidence that joy ever happened here at all. By the time dawn creeps into the windows, painting the sky pale pink and grey, the house looks exactly as it did before the first guest arrived, immaculate and silent, as if the night never occurred. You climb the servant stairs with legs that barely respond, every step a small act of will, and when you finally collapse onto your bed, you do not even undress, your body sinking into the mattress with a gratitude so deep it borders on relief. Sleep comes quickly, dreamless and heavy. When you wake again to the sound of the morning bell, the party already feels unreal, like something you imagined rather than lived. And yet the faint smell of extinguished candles clinging to your uniform tells you it was real, that you were there, that your hands helped build and dismantle a world in a single night. As you wash your face in cold water and pin your hair beneath your cap once more, a quiet realization takes hold, one that will stay with you long after the music fades. These houses are not built for rest. They are built for performance, and the people who keep them running are never meant to take a bow. What no one tells you about houses like this is that beneath the silence and discipline, beneath the rules and inspections and rigid hierarchy, there exists another world entirely, one that does not appear on floor plans and is never mentioned in ledgers, a society built not of marble and crystal, but of shared exhaustion, whispered jokes, and the quiet understanding that everyone below stairs is surviving the same thing together. You begin to recognize it in small ways at first. A kitchen maid slipping an extra roll onto your plate when the cook isn't looking. A footman holding a door a fraction longer than necessary, so you can pass without being seen. A laundress teaching you how to remove wine stains from silk without leaving a mark, her voice low, her eyes always flicking toward the doorway in case someone important appears. These moments are never acknowledged openly, because helping each other too visibly can look like fraternizing, and fraternizing is discouraged, but everyone understands that the house only functions because the servants quietly bend the rules for one another. Below stairs has its own hierarchy, but it also has its own loyalties. You learn who can be trusted and who cannot, who will report a mistake to advance themselves, and who will quietly fix it and say nothing, who talks too much and who listens, who dreams of leaving service and who has already accepted that this life may be all they ever know. The servants' hall becomes the center of this hidden society. Here, meals are eaten quickly but conversations stretch just long enough to matter. News passed along in fragments, Stories traded about other houses on the Gold Coast, rumors about wages and dismissals and families who are not what they used to be, words that carry a warning, even if you don't yet understand why. You hear names whispered: Vanderbilt, Astor, Morgan, families spoken of with a mix of awe and resentment, and you begin to sense that even among the unimaginably wealthy, there are levels, rivalries, quiet battles being fought over invitations and seating arrangements, and who hosts the most talked about party of the season. And just as the families compete above stairs, the servants compete below. Promotions matter. Moving from third housemaid to second, from second to first, from hall work to a position closer to the family, means lighter labor, better food, slightly more dignity, and for some the faint illusion of security in a world where nothing is truly secure. But ambition is dangerous here. Too much of it draws attention, and attention in this house is rarely a good thing. At night, after the last duties are finished and the bells have gone silent, the house settles into a different rhythm, and that is when the real life below stairs emerges. In corridors where gas lamps are turned low, servants lean against walls and finally let their shoulders drop. In laundry rooms still warm from the day's work, women sit on overturned baskets and rub their aching hands, sharing stories of home in Ireland, in Germany, in Sweden, in places that feel impossibly far away now. Someone hums a tune softly, another joins in, and for a few minutes the house holds music that was never meant for guests, music born of memory and longing rather than performance. You learn that many of the servants have secrets. A footman saving every spare dollar to open a tailor shop in Brooklyn, a maid who sends money home to support children she left behind, a gardener who sleeps in a shed because he has nowhere else to go. And there are romances too, quiet and carefully hidden, because relationships between staff are technically forbidden, but loneliness finds cracks in every rule, and sometimes a shared glance in a corridor or a hand brushed accidentally in the dark is enough to sustain someone through another impossible day. You begin to feel yourself becoming part of this world, not just a worker but a member of a community that exists entirely out of sight. And there is comfort in that even as you realize how fragile it is. Because dismissal here is sudden. One mistake, one accusation, one moment of bad luck, and a servant can vanish overnight. Their bed stripped, their name erased from conversation as if they never existed at all. You see it happen once. A girl from Galway who breaks a porcelain figurine while dusting, her hands shaking too badly to hide it. Mrs. Whitmore's face unreadable as she tells her to pack her things before dinner. No farewell. No second chances. Just gone. That night, the servants' quarters are quieter than usual, laughter subdued, voices low, everyone reminded how thin the line is between belonging and being cast out. And yet, the next morning the bells ring as always. The work resumes, and the machine continues because grief has no place in a house that demands perfection. As weeks pass, you begin to notice changes not just in yourself, but in the house. The parties grow more frequent, louder, more extravagant, as if the family senses something slipping and is trying to outrun it with champagne and music. Conversations you overhear grow sharper, more anxious, filled with talk of investments, of markets rising too fast, of fortunes being made overnight. And even though you don't understand the details, you feel the tension humming beneath the polished surfaces. The Gold Coast, for all its beauty, begins to feel like something stretched too tight. And somewhere between the laundry room and the servants' stairs, between whispered jokes and silent fears, you realize that this invisible society below stairs may be the only truly stable thing in a world built entirely on appearances. There is a moment, though you don't recognize it as such when it happens, when the house begins to feel different, not in any way you could easily explain, but in the way a body feels before illness, subtle signs that something is wrong long before anything breaks outright. It starts with conversations. They come to you accidentally, carried through walls, drifting down servant corridors, caught between the opening and closing of doors, fragments of sentences spoken too quietly for guests, but not quietly enough for the people who live inside the house itself. Words like margin and leverage and speculation begin to appear more often, spoken with a nervous laugh, as if turning them into jokes might rob them of their power, and you hear men who once sounded unshakable, now speaking more quickly, more sharply, their confidence edged with something brittle. You don't understand the details, not really, but you understand tone, and tone tells you more than facts ever could. The family sips habits begin to shift. Dinner parties stretch later into the night. Champagne flows faster. Laughter grows louder, almost frantic, as if joy itself has become something that must be proven rather than felt. And you notice that guests linger longer at the bar, that arguments flare and vanish just as quickly, smoothed over with forced smiles and raised glasses. Below stairs, the change is felt immediately. Orders come down more abruptly. Mistakes that would once have earned a sharp look now earn a sharp word. Mrs. Whitmore's inspections grow more exacting, her gaze lingering a fraction longer on every uniform, every button, every pair of hands, as if discipline might somehow keep the world outside from pressing in. You hear whispers in the servants' hall, rumors carried from estate to estate by footmen and chauffeurs who trade news the way others trade cigarettes, stories of families quietly selling off art, of wages paid late, of servants dismissed without explanation, at houses that once seemed untouchable. Someone mentions a banker who shot himself in his office in the city. Someone else says it's nonsense, exaggerated, but no one laughs. You begin to notice small economies. Leftover food becomes rarer. Candles are burned down further before being replaced. Fresh flowers appear a little less often in lesser used rooms. These are not things guests would ever see, but to servants they are as loud as sirens. One evening, while turning down beds, you hear raised voices in a study just off the main corridor, and before you can retreat, you catch a sliver of the argument. Mr. Harrington's voice tight, unfamiliar, Mrs. Harrington's sharp and controlled, words like exposure and risk and assurances, spoken with the careful fury of people who are used to being obeyed, not contradicted. You move away quickly, heart pounding, but the sound stays with you. That night, in the servants' sack quarters, Annie sits on her bed longer than usual, staring at the wall instead of undressing, and when you ask if she sits all right, she shrugs and says her sister lost her position in another house, let go without notice, because the family decided to economize. Economize. It sounds harmless. It isn't. Sit. Below stairs, economizing means hunger, means uncertainty, means the difference between a bed and the street. The invisible society tightens in response. People watch each other more carefully. Alliances form and harden. Small kindnesses become more deliberate, because everyone knows that if things fall apart above stairs, it will be the servants who feel it first and worst. You notice that Sarah has begun saving more of her wages, that Bridget talks less about the future and more about getting through the winter, that Patrick the gardener mentions factories hiring men out west, as if planting the idea might somehow make it real. The house itself seems to sense the tension. Footsteps echo differently at night. Doors close more sharply. The air feels heavier, as though the walls are holding their breath. And yet, the parties continue. If anything, they become more extravagant, more desperate in their beauty, as if the families believe that enough music, enough champagne, enough light might hold the darkness at bay. You work one such party late into the night, moving through corridors as the orchestra plays below, when you overhear a conversation that chills you in a way exhaustion never could. Two men stand near a window, voices low, one saying that trees don't grow to the sky, the other insisting there is still time, still money to be made, still fools willing to buy. You don't know what it means exactly, but you know enough to feel fear settle somewhere deep in your chest. That night, lying in your narrow bed, the sounds of laughter drifting up faintly from below, you realize something that changes the way you see the house forever. This place, for all its stone and marble and money, is not solid. It is balanced. Balanced on confidence. Balanced on belief. balanced on the idea that tomorrow will always be richer than today, and once that belief cracks, everything else will follow. You fall asleep with that thought heavy in your mind, unaware of how close the world is to proving you right, unaware that the next season will not be like the ones before, and that the invisible society you have come to rely on is about to be tested in ways no amount of discipline or loyalty can prevent. The day the news truly arrives on the Gold Coast does not come with sirens or shouting or any grand announcement, but with a pause, a hesitation so subtle that only people who live inside the machinery notice it at all. It is a Tuesday. The weather is mild, the sky unremarkable, the sort of day that would normally pass without leaving a mark, and that is exactly what makes it unsettling, because nothing looks different when everything has already changed. You hear it first in the servants' side hall. The radio, usually kept low and ignored, crackles with a voice that sounds strained, words tumbling over one another too quickly, numbers mentioned without context, phrases like sharp decline and panic selling drifting through the room, while people eat in silence, forks slowing, eyes lifting briefly toward the sound, before returning to their plates. No one says anything at first. Servants are trained not to comment on the affairs of the world above them, especially when those affairs belong to people whose favor determines whether you sleep in a bed or on the street. But silence has weight, and this silence feels heavy. By mid-morning, you notice that bells ring less often, that requests come later than usual, that the house seems to be waiting for instructions that never quite arrive, and when Sarah sends you to dust the study, she does so with a look that tells you to move carefully, to listen, to disappear faster than usual, if footsteps approach. The study door is closed. It is rarely closed. Inside, voices murmur, low and urgent, papers shuffle, and you catch just enough to understand that something has gone wrong in a way that cannot be undone by charm or money alone. That afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore calls a meeting. It is not announced ahead of time, which alone is enough to make the servants uneasy, because meetings mean decisions, and decisions mean change. She stands at the head of the servants' hall, posture rigid, hands folded, her face composed with effort rather than habit, and when she speaks, her voice carries a careful calm that does nothing to disguise the seriousness beneath it. She tells you that there will be adjustments. She uses that word deliberately. Adjustments to staffing, adjustments to hours, adjustments to expenditures. She does not say layoffs. She does not say dismissal. She does not say the word everyone is thinking, but everyone understands. The first name is Reed that evening, a hall boy, barely 16, whose job was to polish brass railings and open doors that will now remain closed, is told to pack his things by morning, given a small envelope with his final wages, and instructed to leave quietly. No farewell, no explanation, just gone. The next day, 2 more follow. A laundress, a second kitchen maid. By the end of the week, empty beds appear in the servants' quarters like missing teeth, their absence more noticeable than their presence ever was. Below stairs, people stop talking about the future altogether. Plans are folded away like maps to places that no longer exist. Bridget stops mentioning saving. Patrick the gardener spends longer hours in the tool shed, sharpening blades that do not need sharpening. Annie begins counting her money at night, lips moving silently as she calculates how long she could survive if her name is next. Above stairs, the family behaves as if nothing is wrong. Dinner is still served on time. The table is still set with silver. The curtains are still drawn at dusk. But the music is different. Pianos play softer. Laughter comes in bursts instead of waves. Guests arrive in smaller numbers, stay for shorter visits, leave earlier, and when they do speak, their voices carry a sharpness that was never there before, an edge of urgency that no amount of champagne can fully soften. One evening, while refilling water pitchers, you overhear a guest say that the city is chaos, that men are leaping from windows, that fortunes are evaporating overnight, and another guest replies too quickly, too loudly, that everything will stabilize, that it always does, that America is too big to fail. The words feel rehearsed, like something said to keep fear from spreading. That night, as you lie in bed listening to the house breathe around you, you realize something that makes sleep difficult. The Gold Coast was built on confidence, on the belief that wealth was permanent, on the assumption that tomorrow would always be larger, brighter, richer than today. And now that belief is faltering, not collapsing yet, just hesitating, like music missing a beat. And when music hesitates, dancers stumble. You close your eyes knowing that this is only the beginning, that the real changes have not yet arrived, that the house is still pretending to be what it was, even as the foundation beneath it quietly shifts. Tomorrow more names may be read. Tomorrow another bed may go empty. Tomorrow someone else will discover that invisibility does not protect you when the lights begin to go out. But for now, the house holds its breath. And so do you. The first real sign that the world you have learned to navigate is beginning to dissolve does not come with an announcement or a farewell dinner or even a raised voice, but with suitcases, heavy leather trunks appearing in the front hall one quiet morning, lined up neatly beside the marble staircase, as if they have always belonged there, their brass fittings dulled from years of travel, their presence unmistakable and unsettling because trunks mean departure, and departure means uncertainty. The family is leaving early that season, weeks before anyone expected, and the reason is never spoken aloud to the staff, though it does not need to be, because everyone below stairs understands what it means when a house closes ahead of schedule, when curtains are drawn back in rooms that should still be full of light, when fires are allowed to go out in chambers that once had to be warm before dawn, because these are not choices made lightly by people who built their lives around abundance. You are sent to help pack the guest rooms first, folding linens that will not be used again until spring, wrapping delicate objects in tissue paper, with hands that have learned how to be careful without trembling. And as you work, you notice how much smaller the house feels already, how spaces that once buzzed with voices and footsteps now echo faintly, as though the walls themselves are unsure what to do without constant attention. Downstairs, the servants' hall is quieter than you have ever known it. Conversations reduced to murmurs, plates scraped clean not from hunger, but from habit. Everyone listening for their name, for the sound of footsteps that might stop behind their chair, because departure does not only apply to families, it moves downward, room by room, person by person. Mrs. Whitmore begins calling people into her office one at a time, and each summons sends a ripple through the room, every servant pretending not to watch, while watching anyway, because the outcome is always visible afterward, either relief carried carefully back to a seat, or the hollow shock of someone who has just learned that their place in this house has ended. When the Harrington motor cars finally roll down the drive, leaving behind tire marks that fade quickly into gravel, the house falls into a silence, so complete it feels unnatural, as though sound itself has been dismissed along with the guests. And for the first time since you arrived, there is nothing immediate to do, no bells ringing, no rooms demanding attention, no music drifting through floors to remind you that the performance is still ongoing. The closing of the house begins almost immediately. Furniture shrouded in white sheets, chandeliers wrapped carefully in muslin, windows shuttered one by one, turning grand rooms into shadowed shapes. And as you move through these spaces, covering beauty that once felt permanent, you realize how fragile all of it truly is, how easily splendor can be reduced to outlines beneath cloth. Servants are released in waves, some with references, some with small envelopes, some with nothing but instructions to leave by morning, and each departure chips away at the invisible society you had come to rely on, until faces that once filled the corridors are gone, replaced by echoes and memory. Patrick the gardener is among the last to go, shaking your hand awkwardly before leaving through the servants' entrance, his tools packed neatly, his eyes steady but distant, already turned toward whatever future he has decided on, and Bridget lingers in the kitchen longer than usual, wiping a counter that is already clean, as if delaying her own reckoning by sheer will. You remain, for now, one of the few kept on to maintain the empty house through winter, a strange privilege that feels less like security and more like waiting inside, a shell that has lost its living creature, because an empty mansion is not restful, it is haunted by what it once was, by voices that no longer exist, by routines that have nowhere to land. At night, the silence presses in on you, the absence of music louder than any orchestra, the absence of laughter heavier than any workload. And as you lie in your narrow bed listening to wind move through shutters that were once thrown open to summer air, you understand something that no one ever taught you, that wealth does not vanish all at once, it retreats, slowly and carefully, taking warmth and noise and people with it, leaving behind only stone and memory. And in that quiet, as the house waits for a spring that may never bring things back to how they were, you realize that the Gold Coast was never built to endure emptiness, that these places were designed for spectacle, not survival, and that when the audience disappears, the stage itself begins to feel unsure of its purpose. You fall asleep, knowing that what is ending here is not just a season or a job or even a way of life, but an illusion that once felt unbreakable, and that when it finally shatters completely, it will not be the families who feel the sharpest edges first, but the people who lived their lives quietly behind the walls, believing that if they kept everything running smoothly enough, the world above them might stay intact. Winter arrives without ceremony, slipping into the house the way silence does, slowly at first and then all at once, until the rooms that once glowed with candlelight and laughter feel cavernous and hollow, the air colder despite the fires kept burning in only a handful of rooms, because heating a palace when almost no one lives in it is an exercise in futility, a gesture more symbolic than practical. Only a skeleton staff remains now, just enough people to keep pipes from freezing, roofs from collapsing under snow, and the illusion alive that this place still matters to someone. And among them you move differently than before, your footsteps louder in the emptiness, your presence no longer absorbed by crowds of guests and bustling corridors, but echoing back at you from stone walls that seem surprised to hear a human voice at all. Your duties shift with the season. Less performance, more preservation, checking windows for drafts, emptying ash from fireplaces that are rarely used, walking long corridors simply to make sure nothing has gone wrong in the night. And as you move through rooms covered in white sheets, furniture reduced to ghostly shapes, you begin to understand how much of this house's life came, not from its architecture or its wealth, but from the constant motion of people inside it. Downstairs, the servants' hall feels too large for the few who gather there now, conversations echoing awkwardly, meals eaten more slowly because there is no rush, no bells demanding immediate response, and this absence of urgency is unsettling in its own way, because it leaves room for thoughts you once pushed aside in exhaustion. Bridget is gone now, released with the rest of the kitchen staff, her departure quiet but final, and though she hugged you tightly and promised to write, you know how distance works, how letters slow and then stop, not from lack of care but from the simple burden of surviving elsewhere. Patrick is gone too, along with most of the gardeners, leaving the grounds to winter's mercy, hedges untrimmed, fountains drained and silent, statues dusted with snow like forgotten relics, and as you look out over the grounds from an upstairs window, you realize that nature wastes no time reclaiming what money once tried to control. At night, the house sounds different, sharper, every creak magnified, every gust of wind rattling shutters like a warning, and when you lie awake listening, you feel as though you are inside a great sleeping animal, one that might never fully wake again, its breath slow and uncertain beneath layers of stone and history. There are moments of unexpected beauty in this emptiness, mornings when frost coats the gardens and the rising sun turns everything gold, evenings when firelight flickers against bare walls and the silence feels almost reverent, as if the house is finally allowed to rest after decades of being forced to perform. And in those moments you understand why some people grow attached to places like this despite everything they demand. But there is fear too, practical and unromantic. Fear of what happens if the family never returns. If spring comes and the gates remain closed, if the wages stop, because loyalty does not pay rent and empty houses do not feed the people who care for them. Mrs. Whitmore grows thinner over the winter, her movements slower, her voice still firm but carrying an edge of fatigue you have never heard before, and when she gives instructions now they are fewer, more deliberate, as if she is conserving energy, aware that authority means less when there are fewer people left to command. You begin to imagine other futures, not in detail but as vague shapes, possibilities you once did not allow yourself to consider, rooms in boarding houses, work in the city, factories, kitchens, anywhere that pays regularly and does not depend on the whims of families who may never return, and the thought frightens you as much as it comforts you, because this house, for all its cruelty, has given your days structure, your survival rhythm. Some nights, you dream of sound, of music echoing through ballrooms now dark, of voices rising and falling, of footsteps returning to halls that feel too wide without them, and you wake disoriented, the quiet pressing in so hard it feels physical, like a weight on your chest, and as winter deepens, snow piling against the servants' entrance, roads growing difficult, the outside world shrinking to a distant idea, you realize that this season is not just about weather or economics, but about transition, about the slow recognition that eras do not end in dramatic collapse, but in gradual thinning, people leaving one by one until suddenly there is nothing left to leave. You keep working because there is nothing else to do yet, because routine still offers comfort, because as long as you are needed, however slightly, you can pretend that this place still has a future, and that you, by extension, still do too. And somewhere deep inside the house, beneath layers of dust cloth and memory, the question begins to form, quiet but persistent, asking not when the family will return, but whether you will still be here when they do, or whether this winter is teaching you how to let go before the house does it for you. The letter arrives on a grey morning, when the house feels especially still, carried up the long drive by a single motor car whose engine sounds too loud in the emptiness, the crunch of gravel echoing far longer than it should, and when Mrs. Whitmore takes the envelope from the driver, her hand pauses just slightly, not enough for anyone to comment on, but enough for you to notice, because by now you have learned to read the smallest hesitations the way sailors read changes in wind. The envelope is thick, official, heavier than the casual correspondence that once arrived daily, and Mrs. Whitmore does not open it immediately, instead carrying it with her as she moves through the house, giving a few instructions in a voice that is steady but restrained, as if she already knows what the paper inside contains, and is delaying the moment when it becomes real. It is only later, when she calls the remaining staff together in the servants' hall, that the meaning of the letter begins to take shape, not through dramatic words or raised voices, but through careful phrasing chosen to soften something that cannot truly be softened, because she tells you that the family will not be returning in the spring, that circumstances have changed, that the house will be closed indefinitely, a phrase that sounds temporary but feels permanent the moment it settles into the room. Indefinitely means there is no date to wait for. Indefinitely means this winter is not a pause but a conclusion. She explains that a few of you will be kept on for a short time longer to assist with final arrangements, inventories, preparations for sale or lease or something else she does not specify, because even now the future of the house itself remains uncertain, balanced somewhere between preservation and abandonment, much like the lives of the people standing before her. No names are read yet, but the knowledge hangs in the air, heavy and unavoidable, and you feel it settle into your body the way cold does, slowly at first and then all at once, a realization that whatever safety this place offered, however fragile and conditional, is coming to an end. After the meeting, no one speaks much. People drift back to their duties with a strange deliberateness, every movement suddenly charged with awareness, because when an ending is named, even quietly, everything that follows becomes tinged with significance. Every corridor walked potentially for the last time. Every door opened and closed, an action that may never be repeated. You find yourself moving more slowly through the house, noticing details you once passed without thought. The way light falls across a staircase at midday, the faint wear on banisters shaped by generations of hands, the pattern of cracks in ceilings hidden from guests, but familiar to those who worked beneath them, and you realize that memory does not wait for departure. It begins its work the moment permanence is withdrawn. In the days that follow, crates begin to appear again. Not the hopeful packing of early departures, but something more final, labelled carefully, catalogued, the contents of rooms reduced to lists and numbers, and as you help wrap objects that once felt untouchable, you understand how quickly meaning drains from things when the people who valued them are gone. Silver becomes inventory, paintings become assets, rooms become square footage. The language changes, and with it the feeling of the house, which now seems less like a living place and more like a body being prepared for burial, cleaned and ordered and made presentable for a world that will view it without knowing what it once contained. At night, sleep becomes uneven. You lie awake listening to the house settle around you, aware that soon there will be no reason for anyone to listen at all, that these sounds will exist without witnesses, until even they fade into silence, and you wonder what happens to places that are remembered only by the people who no longer have access to them. You begin to imagine yourself elsewhere more clearly now, not just vague possibilities, but specific scenes, a small rented room, unfamiliar streets, work that is harder in some ways and easier in others, work that does not require invisibility, and the thought feels both terrifying and strangely light, like stepping to the edge of something high and realizing you want to jump, not because you are fearless, but because staying still has become unbearable. One evening, as you stand at a window overlooking the grounds, snow melting into dark patches on the lawn, the sky heavy with the promise of more weather to come, you understand that the Gold Coast was never meant to last as it was, that it was built for a moment when belief outpaced reality, and that you, like the house, have been living inside that belief, mistaking endurance for stability. The letter did not just announce the end of a season or a job or a chapter in someone else's life. It announced a narrowing of time, a moment when waiting is no longer an option. And though no one has yet told you when you must leave, you feel something shift inside you, a quiet resolve forming not out of confidence but necessity, because the house is teaching you its final lesson now, not about service or invisibility or discipline, but about impermanence, about the danger of tying your future to structures built to serve someone else's dream. You do not yet know what you will do, only that staying will soon no longer be possible, that the shape of your life is changing, even if the details remain unclear. And as you turn away from the window and walk back into the dim corridors, you carry with you the growing certainty that when you finally step beyond these walls for the last time, you will not be leaving empty-handed, because this place, in all its grandeur and cruelty, has taught you how to survive endings. The final weeks in the house do not announce themselves as final at all, but arrive disguised as routine, days that look almost like the ones before them, if you do not look too closely, if you do not count how many rooms are now permanently closed, how many corridors no longer need to be walked, how many bells will never ring again, because endings rarely feel dramatic from the inside, they feel administrative. Your work becomes strangely intimate, less about maintaining perfection and more about saying goodbye through small acts of care, dusting objects that will soon belong to strangers, folding linens that may never be unfolded in this place again, walking the same paths through the house while knowing exactly how many times you have walked them before, and how few remain. Mrs. Whitmore keeps you busy, not out of necessity so much as habit, assigning inventories, lists, checks that feel redundant but comforting, because as long as there is work, there is structure, and as long as there is structure, the collapse does not feel complete. And you realize that she, more than anyone, understands what it means to lose a house like this, because she did not simply work here, she ruled here, quietly and absolutely, and when the house closes, Her authority dissolves with it. You begin to see her differently now, not as the immovable presence she once seemed, but as a woman carrying the weight of decades spent maintaining an illusion that no longer serves anyone, her back straighter than it needs to be, her voice still precise, but her pauses longer, her gaze lingering on rooms she once controlled without thought. The remaining staff drift through the days with a shared, unspoken awareness that this is temporary, that each task completed brings you closer to dispersal, and there is a strange gentleness in the way people treat one another now. Fewer sharp words, fewer corrections, because hierarchy loses its edge when there is nothing left to compete for. You take on tasks that once belonged to others, work that brings you into parts of the house you rarely saw before, basements where records are stored, attics where forgotten furniture waits under layers of dust, small rooms built only for function and never for beauty. And in these spaces you find evidence of how long this house has been preparing for its own disappearance. Documents yellowed with age, repairs made and remade, attempts to preserve something that was already slipping. One afternoon, while packing the contents of a writing desk in a guest room that smells faintly of old paper and tobacco, you come across a stack of letters tied with ribbon, correspondence from years before the crash, full of confidence and plans and optimism so complete it feels almost naive, and you are struck by how quickly certainty ages, how fragile the future looks once it becomes the past. At night, the house feels less oppressive than it did in winter, as if it has accepted what is coming and no longer resists the quiet. And when you lie awake listening to familiar sounds one last time, you notice that you are no longer afraid of the silence, because silence now feels like transition rather than threat. You begin to sort your own belongings, few as they are, folding clothes carefully, discarding things that no longer serve you, and the act feels symbolic in a way you did not expect, because you realize how much of your life here was lived lightly, ready to move, never fully settled, and that this impermanence, once a source of anxiety, has become a kind of strength. Conversations turn practical. Where will you go? Who might be hiring? Which streets in the city are safest? Which boarding houses are still taking women? Advice is exchanged quietly, generously, because there is no advantage left in withholding it. And in these exchanges you feel the invisible society one last time, not as a system of survival, but as a brief community formed under pressure and now dispersing back into the wider world. On one of the last evenings, as the light fades through tall windows and the house settles into its familiar creaks, Mrs. Whitmore asks you to walk with her through the main floor, something she has never done before, and together you move slowly through rooms that once demanded constant attention, her footsteps measured, your presence no longer hidden because there is no one left to hide from. She does not speak much. She does not need to. The house speaks for itself. And as you walk, you realize that this is the closest thing to acknowledgement you will ever receive. Not praise or gratitude, but inclusion in a final inspection. A silent recognition that you were part of what kept this place alive for as long as it was. When you return to the servants' quarters that night, you understand that leaving will not feel like escape or loss alone, but like the completion of a cycle, because you did not simply pass through this house, it passed through you as well, shaping how you move, how you notice, how you endure. You fall asleep, knowing that the next days will bring decisions that can no longer be postponed, that soon the gates will close for the last time, and that when you walk out, you will not be carrying the weight of the house with you, but something quieter and more durable, the knowledge that you have already survived the slow ending of a world, and that whatever waits beyond the Gold Coast cannot erase what that has taught you. The day the house finally closes does not begin with drama or announcements or raised voices, but with the same bell at 5:30 that has governed your life for years. The sound familiar enough that your body responds before your mind does, rising automatically, reaching for clothes that will soon no longer be uniforms, moving through motions that no longer belong to a system but to muscle memory. Outside, the morning is pale and still, the kind of autumn quiet that feels suspended, as if the world itself is waiting to see what happens next. And inside the house, the echoes are sharper now, footsteps sounding louder in corridors that have lost their softening presence of constant activity, doors closing with a finality that was once absent, because there will be no reopening tomorrow, no guests arriving, no need to reset what has already been cleared. Your tasks are minimal, ceremonial almost, a final sweep through rooms that no longer need to impress anyone, checking windows that will soon be shuttered indefinitely, making sure fires are cold and ashes cleared, because even at the end, the rules of care remain, ingrained too deeply to abandon. The remaining staff gather in the servants' hall after breakfast. Fewer faces than there should be, the long table feeling suddenly oversized, and Mrs. Whitmore stands at the head, with her ledger closed for once, no lists to read, no corrections to issue, only the necessity of marking an ending that has already arrived whether anyone acknowledges it or not. She thanks you. The words are brief, controlled, almost awkward, because gratitude was never part of the structure here. But you hear what lies beneath them, years of shared endurance compressed into a single moment, and when she meets your eyes, there is no hierarchy left in the look she gives you, only recognition. People leave in ones and twos rather than all at once, because departures are easier that way, less overwhelming, and you watch familiar figures disappear down the servants' stairs for the last time, carrying suitcases that contain far less than the years they spent here, yet somehow enough to move forward. When your turn comes, there is no audience. You walk the path from the back entrance with your small bag in hand, gravel crunching beneath your shoes, just as it did on your first day, and the symmetry of it does not escape you. The way beginnings and endings mirror each other so closely that they almost blur together. You stop once, just beyond the gate, and turn back. The house looks smaller than it used to, not diminished exactly, but quiet, like a performer after the curtain has fallen, impressive still, but no longer demanding attention. And you realize that much of its power came not from stone or scale, but from the lives moving inside it, the invisible energy that kept it awake. Without you, without all of you, it is only a structure. The road ahead stretches toward the station, the same road you once walked with fear and hope tangled together, but now your steps are steadier, your pace measured, because you are not arriving anymore, you are choosing. The city waits. Not kindly, not cruelly, just indifferently, as cities do. And you understand that whatever happens next will not be softened by chandeliers or hidden corridors or systems designed to make effort invisible. But that does not frighten you as it once might have, because you have already lived inside a machine that demanded everything and offered very little in return, and you learned how to endure it without losing yourself. As the train carries you away from the Gold Coast, the landscape shifts slowly, manicured lawns giving way to tighter streets, larger crowds, movement without choreography, and you feel the strange lightness of being unassigned, of not belonging to any single house, any single routine, any single bell. You do not know where you will land yet. That uncertainty hums quietly beneath your thoughts, but it is not panic, it is possibility. The kind that comes only after something definitive has ended. The past does not vanish as the distance grows, it settles. It becomes something you carry rather than something that contains you. And as the city rises ahead of you, dense and imperfect and alive, you understand that the skills you learned in silence, patience, observation, resilience, will serve you here just as well as they did behind limestone walls. Because survival, you have learned, does not depend on luxury, but on adaptability. The train slows. People stand, gather bags, prepare to step into whatever waits for them beyond the doors. You remain seated for a moment longer, breathing, feeling the weight of what you are leaving, and the openness of what you are entering, knowing that this story does not end with departure, that it simply changes setting, pace, and rules. And when you finally rise and move with the crowd toward the exit, you do so without looking back again, because some places do not need a final glance to remain with you. They stay whether you invite them or not, woven into how you walk forward, how you choose, how you rest, how you endure, and how, quietly, you begin again. Years later, long after the Gold Coast has faded into memory in photographs and guided tours, long after the last of the great houses have been divided, repurposed, or erased entirely, you sometimes wake in the early morning before the city stirs and listen for a bell that will never ring again. And in that quiet space between sleep and waking, you understand something that once felt impossible to grasp, that the house was never the point, not the limestone or the chandeliers or the ballrooms polished until they gleamed like mirrors, but the people who moved through it unseen, who carried water and lit fires and folded sheets, and made beauty appear effortless for those who believed effort was beneath them. You live simply now in a small apartment with windows that look out onto ordinary streets, and there are no secret passages here, no invisible staircases, no rules about which doors you may or may not use, and yet the habits remain, the careful way you fold a towel, the instinct to notice what others overlook, the quiet pride in work done well, even when no one is watching, because these things were never taken from you when the house closed, they were given. Sometimes you pass former estates turned museums, or schools, or parks, and you see visitors wandering through rooms that once demanded perfection, listening to stories about glamour and excess and famous names, and you smile softly because you know the other story too, the one that lives in the walls and the floors and the narrow staircases. No guide mentions the story of endurance, of long hours and aching hands and friendships formed in basements and shared meals, eaten quickly before the next task began. That story does not appear on plaques. It lives only in people. It lives in you. You think of Bridget and Patrick and Sarah and even Mrs. Whitmore, each of them shaped by a world that no longer exists, each of them carrying forward something that could not be dismantled when the mansions fell. And you understand that history is not only made by those who are remembered, but by those who made remembering possible. At night, when the city hum settles into something softer and the lights glow instead of glare, you allow yourself rest without guilt, because you have earned it many times over, and as sleep comes it does not bring dreams of endless corridors or cold scuttles anymore, but something gentler, a sense of having stood inside a moment that mattered, even if no one ever wrote your name down. The world you served disappeared, as all worlds do eventually, but what it taught you remains. That dignity does not require recognition, that survival is a skill learned quietly, and that even in the most unequal places, humanity persists in small acts of care passed from one invisible hand to another. And so the story ends not with a mansion or a party or a collapse, but with a woman who lived through all of it and carried forward what mattered most, the knowledge that being unseen does not mean being insignificant, and that even the quietest lives leave echoes long after the music stops, long after the lights go out, long after the last door closes for good,